Hey there, VC. My name is Ross, and welcome to my channel, Just for the Record. Today I wanted to discuss a series of records made between 1957 and 1963. These were primarily classical recordings on the RCA Victor Living Stereo label. First, I thought I'd do a brief overview of the history of recording, commercial recording. The very first records were on these wax cylinders, which were about 2 to 3 minutes in length. And this is an Edison record. And Columbia also was one of the major labels. This is another cylinder. This one has seen better days, sadly. Gradually, the 78 RPM disc was invented, which allowed for longer playing times. And the first ones were one-sided and were notably acoustically recorded before the use of microphones and amplification. Gradually, by the late 1920s, 1930s, electronic recording had come into being, and we had two-sided 78 RPMs, which became the norm for 2 or 3 decades. Post-war, post-World War II, that is, the LP, long-playing, high-fidelity record, was invented by Columbia. And RCA was also one of the first labels to come out with the LP. And this allowed for much longer playing times and better sound. The next invention was the 45 RPM record in the mid-1950s or so. And this was considered great for portability because people could bring their record players around and stack these on a spindle and just play music wherever they were. These box sets came in probably 3 to 4 records generally, and the RCA ones were really nice because they were on this translucent red vinyl. But of course the playing sides were short, and the fidelity was not as high as the LP. But by 1957, the Westrix cutter head was developed for cutting stereo LPs. And by 1958, RCA Victor started releasing LPs in stereo and created the Living Stereo series. This was one of the first ones. Now, these were recorded in 2-track, which meant just a left and a right microphones. And this is Arthur Fiedler and the Boston Pops, Gaiety Parisienne by Offenbach. And this is a very highly regarded recording. And I'll show you the label. This is what is called or known as the Shaded Dog label because it has Victor and the gramophone on top with a little shading behind him. And this is a red seal. Red seal was for RCA's classical records. And this is also Sprach Zarathustra by Fritz Reiner and the Chicago Symphony. This is a very famous recording. And this was one of the first stereo recordings RCA had made in 1954, but it wasn't available until much later, I think around 1960 as an LP, although it had been selling well as a reel-to-reel tape up until that time. This is a very collectible record. This is Gounod and Bizet with Alexander Gibson in the Royal Opera House. This was recorded in England, and this is one of the Decca contract recordings. RCA had contracted with Decca in England to do some classical recordings at their concert halls. And Decca was also one of the forerunners in developing high fidelity and stereo recording over in England. Made excellent recordings, and the Decca on RCA recordings are highly coveted and collectible. And this is probably the rarest one. It may be the rarest of the living stereos. Also very expensive. This copy is on loan from Russ at Needle Drop Records. So thank you, Russ, and I'll be returning this soon. This was another English Decca. This is Borodin Symphony No. 2, and this is with Jean Martinin with the London Symphony Orchestra, and another collectible Decca recording. This is one of my favorite albums, one of my favorite RCAs. This is Debussy and Ibert, Charles Munch with the Boston Symphony Orchestra. Just a fabulous recording and lovely, lovely piece of music. Excuse me. Scheherazade is one of the most famous pieces that RCA recorded. And this is the Fritz Reiner recording with Chicago Symphony. This is a very popular record and great performance and great sounding piece. And this is a recording of Rachmaninoff's Rhapsody on the Theme of Paganini by Fritz Reiner and the Chicago Symphony, but featuring Arthur Rubinstein on piano. This is a phenomenal record as well. And these are some of my other favorites here. Heifetz with Munch and the Boston Symphony again. And he was probably the best violinist of the 20th century, if not all time. But great recording. Here's ballet music from the opera. And this is actually a French or Paris recording. And I'm not sure if Decca recorded this. I don't know the history of that. But this is the Paris Conservatoire Orchestra. And is also a fabulous record. There's a recording of Daphnis and Chloe by Ravel with Charles Munch and the Boston Symphony Orchestra. I believe this was also a very early recording on 2-track stereo, and also very collectible. And this Witch's Brew is one of the most famous of the living stereos. This is the quintessential Decca RCA recording. Just a phenomenal sounding record, great pieces of music, awesome Halloween record. It's with the New Symphony Orchestra and Alexander Gibson conducting. And this has been reissued many times, and for good reason. And this is the Venice album, and this was also a Decca recording in England at the famous Kingsway Hall. And the thing I forgot to mention about Witch's Brew, and true for this record, is you can hear the London Tube underground or subway rumbling beneath the orchestra hall, which Kingsway Hall was famous for. Apparently they Decca developed a way of cutting out the rumble with some kind of filtering system they used, but it's loud and clear on these records, and it's rather fun. It's kind of enjoyable. This is Fritz Reiner and the CSO, probably one of the most famous renderings of Mussorgsky's Pictures at an Exhibition. Great record, and this has also been reissued many times, and just a wonderful piece of music. Tchaikovsky Pathetique. I can never pronounce that right. This is with Boston Symphony and Montauk's conducting, and this was a very early two-track recording, I believe, as well. Eventually, RCA moved on from two-track to three-track recording, in which, to mix to stereo, they would blend the middle track in with the two tracks to kind of get rid of that hole in the middle impact from having two channels. This is one of my faves, Comedians. And this was a RCA Victor Symphony Orchestra recording by Louis Layton and Richard Moore, two of RCA's famous producers and engineers. This is a great recording of Stravinsky's Rite of Spring by Montauk's and Paris Conservatoire Orchestra. This was also recorded in Paris. And this is probably my favorite recording of that piece. Arthur Fiedler was one of the big conductors for the label and was popular, had a very long career. This is one of my favorites of his, particularly for the album cover. I really like the audio gear on the front and the tubes, and that's really cool cover. This is one of my favorite pieces of music too, Shostakovich Symphony No. 5, and this is with Howard Mitchell conducting the National Symphony Orchestra. This is a great record. This is another recording that Arthur Fiedler made of the Gaieté Parisienne with Boston Pops. This was a three-track recording this time, where the original or first was the two-track. And this is a very good performance. It doesn't quite have the depth or 3D-ness of the two-track record, but very fine recording in its own right. And this record always confused me. I never looked closely at first to the titles, but they're actually different records, different pieces of music. When I saw this in the shops, I thought the black and white cover was just a later edition of this. But yeah, they're both concertos with the Boston Symphony, Charles Monk. And great records. And this is a later RCA. This is one of my favorite versions of the 1812 overture. It has choral pieces on it, which are Russian choral folk songs, apparently, that Tchaikovsky based some of the melodies on when he wrote the 1812. And it's just a gorgeous version of it. This is a Canadian pressing, which happens to be on the Shaded Dog. It's also a Dynagroove, which came after the Living Stereo era. But Canada continued to use the Shaded Dog label for quite a long time, up until maybe 1970. Whereas in the States, the label had been changed to different versions. This is one of my favorites too, Prokofiev, Lieutenant Key G and Stravinsky, Song of the Nightingale, Fritz Reiner, CSO. Famous record, great record, and has been reissued by AP and Classic Records in the past. So those are just a few of the recordings I've collected from that series. They're really natural sounding recordings, very three-dimensional, and a lot of that has to do with the technology at the time. They were minimally mic'd, very few tracks were involved in the mixing, and it was all tube amplification and tube gear that recorded and cut and processed the record. So they have a very distinct sound, and many consider them some of the best stereo recordings ever made. So if you develop an interest in collecting that label, you might want to check some thrift stores and shops. And if you find them online for a good price, you're lucky. And for the really rare and collectible ones, you can probably expect to pay a good price for. But just thought I'd share that part of my record collecting journey. And thank you for listening. And like and subscribe if you feel like it. Otherwise, I will talk with you guys later.